Hey guys, it's Kevin in my review for the latest new miniseries from Netflix, of course being Self-Made. So what Self-Made is essentially about is we center on the true story of Madam C.J. Walker. She is basically just this washerwoman in the early 1900s, but she's really destined for more. So one day when her hair is falling out, she comes across this woman, Addie, who has created this new formula that is going to make woman's hair grow back a lot faster. And so basically the CJ or Sarah decides to take this and make it her own, and eventually goes on to develop one of the most successful and innovative basically businesses of all time. She'd also go on to be really the first self-made woman ever. And basically the rest of the show is us seeing her construct this business, but also seeing the various trials and tribulations that come with it. So Self-Made overall, I was really excited for the show, mainly because of just the cast and the story as well. It seemed like something that definitely could be very intriguing, and especially knowing that Netflix was doing another miniseries that was going to be 4 episodes long. Definitely had me very excited. You know, the last time they had a really big miniseries like this, it was something like When They See Us, and while I didn't expect it to be on that level, I was really hoping this could be a very effective watch for sure. I really did, similar to the Central Park 5, I really did not know too much about CJ Walker's story. I didn't know a lot of what she went through and things like that, and so I was really excited to see how the show would turn out. And look, while there are some things I think that Self-Made definitely does do quite well, overall, this miniseries left me surprisingly feeling pretty cold, I have to say. I was pretty let down by this series. There's a lot of stuff that this series does not do quite as well as it could have, and it's honestly a pretty mediocre and rather messy series that's definitely one of the more disappointing things that I've seen in a while. But we're just getting to right now, starting off with the cast. And I will say, for the most part, the show is pretty well casted. I think everyone does do a really good job. But easily, the anchor of this entire thing, and really the thing that keeps it watchable, is Octavia Spencer in this role as Madam C.J. Walker, who, despite, the writing of her character at points, she does an excellent job in this role. She is very passionate here. You really can tell that she cares about CJ Walker. She's doing everything she can to try to bring this character to life, and I think she definitely does do a very strong job with that for sure. I really did find myself rooting for Sarah, and it's mainly because of Spencer's performance. She makes this character very likable. She has a can-do attitude. She has a real rags to riches sort of story in that way. So she keeps it very rootable, and I think especially in the last episode, she definitely does get some really strong moments, and I think is really the main thing that holds this show together. If it wasn't for Spencer, I think this would fall apart even more than it really did. But Spencer is the one thing that I can definitely credit within this show. I thought she did an excellent job here pretty much throughout. I was really happy with what she was doing here overall. Now, the rest of the cast, I think also does do some strong work. Carmen Ejogo does a pretty good job as the character of Addie. Yes, this character is very over the top, which I'll get into a little bit later, but Ejogo does do, I think, a pretty good job at just really chewing up the scenery whenever she's there. She is definitely it's definitely one of those performances that kind of begs you to watch, and I think she does a pretty good job with what she has overall, and it's not her fault where they ended up taking her character. I thought overall she was pretty good here, and the feuding between the two, they definitely do work pretty well together, and I was impressed with what she was doing here. Blair Underwood, I gotta say, was a bit on and off for me. There were points where I thought he was really good. He was doing a really good job at capturing who Christopher Walker really was. His genuine frustration at points with this business, the fact that he wasn't that involved with it, I thought he did a good job with. And then the show takes a turn in the second half, and I just thought he got way too over the top. I didn't think it was that believable, and I just didn't really think he did that great of a job. And honestly, I didn't really feel as much chemistry between him and Octavia Spencer as I really wanted to. It came off a bit flat for me. I wouldn't say completely flat, because they definitely do have some moments, but I just felt that it could have been a lot stronger than it was, and that was keeping me from enjoying the show. Kevin Carroll, though, definitely does do a really strong job here. I kind of wish that he actually played Blair Underwood's role because he is such a great actor. And I'm not just saying that because, leftovers and things like that. He really does have some great moments here. He has one moment in episode 4 that just give him an Emmy for that scene. Just that scene alone, just give him an Emmy because he is incredible. I love what he did here. Garret Morris definitely does have some good scenes as well, as does the rest of the cast, excluding, unfortunately, and I hate saying this, but Tiffany Haddish is just not working in this show at all. I really do feel that. And look, Haddish is an actress that I do like quite a bit. I've said before, I do think she can definitely pick the right roles, but she is just utterly miscasted here. The whole show, she just seems generally confused with how this role is supposed to be. Is this supposed to be a comedic role, or is she supposed to be taking this a lot more seriously? And it never really gelled for me in the way that it should. And considering that Lilia is such an important part of this show, she's such a big character in that way, it's very disappointing for sure. It really does fall flat, unfortunately. Almost every single almost every single scene with her in the first 3 episodes feels like a joke. And a lot of them it feels very awkward. I wouldn't say that Haddish is bad in this role. It just is easily her most awkward performance yet. It feels very tone deaf. It feels very lost, and she just does not do a very good job with knowing what to do with this character. I think that Haddish is a really strong actress, and I'm excited to see what she does in other projects. I know she's going to be in a Paul Schrader movie very soon, so I hope she's able to bring some really good dramatic acting to that. But here, it just really did not seem like she knew what to do in this role. I don't know if it was a direction or whatever, but it was not working at all, and she really did fall flat for me. Like I said, the rest of the cast here overall does a pretty good job. They keep this watchable for the most part, and it's not their fault with just how underwritten a lot of this series is. Now we're going to get into the directing and the writing, which this is where I think we get into the main problem with this show. So I was looking up like the creator of the show and things like that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I went through every single episode, and I cannot recall seeing a created by credits, so it didn't really feel like this show had one voice throughout. It felt like there were multiple voices throughout the show, and I think that really is the main problem here, because there are points where the show does feel genuine. It feels like it is doing everything it can to try to pay tribute to Sarah's legacy, to really shed light on what she did. And then, more often than not, unfortunately, it feels like a bad Lifetime soap opera. And that's very disappointing. It very often comes off as the latter rather than the former, unfortunately. And that was just very disappointing to see, because I feel like the show would be a lot better if they stripped away this tone that was so over the top and utterly ridiculous, and at times just made it very hard to take this seriously. They really don't do a very good job with that at all, and I think the main reason for this is because, again, there just isn't that one voice anchoring this entire show. It feels like there were a bunch of different sort of tonal clashes here. One half wanted this to be really silly and fun. The other half wanted this to be really serious. And you know how I know that? Because the first 3 episodes of the show are very playful and fun, but the last episode is far more serious in that way. It leans far more into the sentimental side of things, and so I just did not feel that either side really worked at all, and it brought things down. I will say the authentic side of the show, I think, works a lot better than the almost self-parody side of points, which just really falls flat, and I don't think they did a good job with. But just overall, it didn't really feel like there was that one specific voice that knew what they wanted the show to be, that really did everything they can to anchor the show. And I think that's really what does bring it down. But what also really brings the show down, I have to say, is the writing, which unfortunately is the worst part of this entire show. Look, I've said this before. I don't need every single biopic to be as accurate as possible. I don't think that realism is always important. But with something like this, I really do feel it would have benefited the show more. Mainly because, not just because this is loosely based. I mean, the show's literally called Self-Made, inspired by the life of CJ Walker. So you already know there's gonna be some stuff that isn't always the most accurate. That's not the problem. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is the story that they're telling here just isn't very interesting at all. And it also, I don't think, is doing a very good job of letting us know who CJ Walker really was. What did she struggle with? Sarah, as a character here, when we meet her, has basically gone through every single traumatic event in her life already. There's really nothing that bad that happens to her within these 4 episodes. It's really just her trying to make this business and her then finding success and growing a community because of that. And that storyline is not nearly as interesting as other things she will tell us about. In the first episode alone, we hear that she was in this family of sharecroppers and she had this very abusive relationship with, I believe it was like her brother or something like that. It's very messy, and that stuff to me seems integral. And it's not that like they needed to show all of that, but me personally, I feel like in order to get me to give a shit, which the show really doesn't give me a reason to, I really felt like they needed to show it. They show some brief glimpses. We get some hints about things, but it never felt like it was enough. And by the end of the show, I just kind of sat there like, okay, this is emotion. This is definitely effective, but I didn't really find myself knowing that much about Sarah as a character. I found her to be pretty flat, and it's mainly because her writing here, she's really just this poor woman who finds this company, really just dives headfirst into it and establishes her own sort of enterprise of sorts. And that's great, but there's really no point when the show tells me, why should I care? Why does this matter so much other than the surface level story of her being this washwoman, which is so glossed over? And that's the other thing. Almost every single thing that happens in the show feels so incredibly rushed to the point where I couldn't tell when things were happening. It's clear throughout these 4 episodes that there is a lot of time that is being skipped, that there is a lot of time that is going by. But at no point does the show do a good job of telling you this is where we are, this is when things are happening, or really show you like why all of this is that important. And I think that's really what brings the entire show down. Just the writing is not good here at all. And also as a result of this very rushed and clunky storytelling that's just really spinning its wheels. The first episode especially, there was a scene 11 minutes in that almost felt like it could be the end of the first episode. Like I was just sitting there like, why couldn't this have been the ending? Like, why did we rush through this entire thing? I didn't really understand the point of them doing that, other than they just wanted to make this a really, like, cliched show. The show also will often feel much more modern than it is. It feels very anachronistic at points. The way the characters will talk, the way certain events take place, it's really awkward, and I really do attribute that to the writing here. It's one of those things where they're trying to take modern sort of sensibilities and translate that into like 20th century, into, 1900s sort of standards. And it doesn't really work at all. I think the perfect example of this is in the first episode when Sarah first encounters Addie. She pictures them in like this boxing ring of sorts, and it's just so silly. It's like the show thought that we weren't smart enough to watch just a standard biopic, like we'd be bored or something. So they had to make it as modern as possible, and it just does not work at all. And like I said, the other stories that they're telling here are honestly really bad. The main storyline of Sarah and Addie and these two just constantly butting heads, it's honestly laughable at times. The way that they act like teenagers. They don't act like grown adults, especially the character of Addie, who is quite literally just a mustache twirling villain that isn't getting her way. There is maybe one hint in the third episode, that there's a bigger reason for her doing this. But other than that, there really is no reason for her to be as angry at Sarah as she is, because this easily could have just been their partnership. Sarah starts off and she wants to sell these tins, and Addie isn't interested in that. So Sarah does it anyway. That's it. That's literally it. It's just Sarah took her, what she was doing and adapted it. And Addie is pissed about it. And so she goes on a whole tirade and starts taking people away. That's literally it. There's really no other reason for this whole feud to be happening. And so it's just not very interesting storytelling really at all. And that really does sink a lot of this down. I forgot to bring this up initially in my review, but another thing I think that really is a big reason as to why the character of Addie just does not work in this at all is because while the character she's playing did exist, this version of her is highly exaggerated and almost completely fictional. And so again, it's one of those things where I get what they were trying to do, and I understand you have to take liberties, but I feel like them creating this version of Addie, they just did it just so they could add this sort of rivalry in there, which again, I don't know what actually happened in real life in this story. But I guarantee it was far more interesting than what we see here. So it's another one of those cases where I really do feel if they would have just told the story as it happened and not add in all this soap opera nonsense, then I actually do think this really could have worked. Ejogo definitely, I think, was for it. I think she definitely was giving it her all for sure. It's really not her fault where the character ended up going. It's just overall, I just didn't think they did a very good job with adapting this character, and I never really found myself all that connected. And it's yet another one of those things that I think actually was a detriment in them kind of making their own sort of fictional story and taking as many liberties as they did here. So combined with the fact that they don't do a good job of telling you who Sarah is other than a surface level, who she was, but then also giving you a reason to really care about anything really brings this down. The subplots as well are really not fleshed out either. There's one with Tiffany Haddish's character, Lilia, that I just simply did not care about. She wants to make this juke joint of sorts with her husband, who you can tell these two don't have a great relationship, and also on top of that, Lilia can't really sing to save her life at all, and so they go in this other direction with her that I actually was kind of on board with, but they don't do anything with it. It just kind of is in the background. It's just something that they do, and it seemed like they were doing that because it wasn't a huge part of Sarah's life. But the problem is, Lilia is such an important character to this story, so the fact that they don't really do anything that interesting with that story, I think was definitely a problem. Same goes with the character of Christopher. At first, you really understand him. You get the sense that he wants to be much more involved with this business, but he's not. He doesn't like that she's shutting him out. But then they go in this direction with him that I understand did happen in real life, but it just didn't work for the character. It felt so incredibly rushed. I didn't understand the motive of like why he decided to go in this direction. There was nothing really hinting at this throughout the rest of the show. And so it came out of left field to me. And especially where he goes in the 4th episode, I just didn't understand what they were trying to do with him at all. And then other characters in the show, like Kevin Caroll's character, this character who is basically a shareholder of Sarah's company. He's doing what he can to try to keep it afloat. They give him sort of a subplot at the end, and while it is effective, it's mainly because Kevin Caroll is such a damn good actor that he's able to sell it. Because, again, as a story, there just isn't a big reason there isn't enough of a reason for, like, why any of this is happening. Why does any of this matter? And I think that's just what really brings a lot of this series down. The show will also attempt to shed light on some topics like slavery and racism, but it feels so surface level. It never feels like that's at the forefront of what they're trying to do, and that's also what really frustrated me about Self-Made. There were so many points where I'm sitting there like, okay, I get the story on a surface level, but what is the larger story that they're trying to tell? What is the message that they're trying to send? And to be honest, other than this being a story of, oh, she was the first woman that did this, this, and this, I didn't really walk away from this feeling like, okay, I know what they're trying to do here. I think this is a really important watch. I didn't really feel that way, and that was just really disappointing to me. So yeah, there's a lot of things writing-wise that just doesn't really work in the show. Cinematography, again, a bit of a mixed bag. When the show is in the 19th century, it looks great. It definitely has the right look and feel. But then when it tries to do either these flashbacks, which are so incredibly rushed and haphazard, and honestly, they feel more like fever dreams than anything. They don't even really feel like, they honestly don't even feel like they really need to be in this show because they barely reference them until the 4th episode. So there's that, but then also these terrible, like, modern day sort of, fantasy sequences they'll do for her are just utterly ridiculous, and I just don't think it worked at all. The music in the show is another big problem I have with it. The show never, throughout the entire show, there is not a the only time we hear a song that would actually be in the 19th century is diegetic music. Any non-diegetic music is completely modern music, and normally, I don't have a problem with that, but again, it just felt so tonally inconsistent. Like, none of the music was fitting here. There were so many scenes where I'm like, why is this song playing? This feels like something I'd hear in the Lifetime TV movie version of this, which I feel like this should be way above, but it very much felt like it was in that ilk. I'm not joking. That's very much what it felt like, and I've already talked about it before, but the editing here is just really bad. It's very messily handled. There's so many things that happen that I was confused as to why they were happening, and I just did not think they did a very good job at telling the story at all. I will say, though, despite all the flaws I do have with the show, the final episode I do actually think is pretty solid. There's a lot of stuff that they do that actually was kind of satisfying. There's a conversation that Sarah and Addie have at the end that I actually did like. I liked where they ended up taking that overall, and I thought that actually was kind of effective. Or some scenes that they'll give to Sarah and Lilia at the end, I thought were pretty effective. But overall, it was one of those things where I could say, yes, this is a good episode, but it all just feels too little too late. Like, the show is really, they knew that they didn't do a lot to get us to care. So now that we're at the end, now we get to care. And it's like, okay, but it's just too late to do that. You should have done that from the get-go. And I think that is primarily the main thing that really does hurt this show. Now, normally at this time, this would be the point where I talk spoilers and everything that goes down, but to be honest, the things that happen in this show are really not worth talking about, and that's the thing. There are things that I could bring up, but they're so brief and so minimal, and they're just not addressed very well, and they happen so quickly that I just don't really have a lot to discuss. And that's what I think that is emblematic of just how rushed this entire series is. There are things that go down, but nothing that I can pinpoint and say, okay, this arc worked. There were definitely things in the last episode, like I said, that wrapped up the show pretty well. But even at that, they're not really things I can discuss. They're a conversation that characters have and things like that, that just overall didn't really do all that much for me. So I can't even really sit here and say like what this show didn't do right in terms of spoilers, because there just really isn't a lot to talk about on that front, I have to say. So again, there's a lot of things that I think really could have worked here. You got a really good lead performance from Octavia Spencer. You got a good supporting cast, except for Sans Tiffany Haddish, really, who really just feels miscasted here. You have a story that could have been potentially interesting, but it focuses on the least interesting elements. It makes it much more generic. It leaves out so many things that I feel were so integral to the story. It's so incredibly rushed. It's skipping over so many key events that I feel like really could have enriched these characters and just given us a reason to care a lot more. And just overall, it just feels like such a tonally inconsistent series. This is a show that just, I think, could have been so much more if it was handled well. If you had given it more episodes, if you had given them more time, there's no reason why every episode couldn't have been 90 minutes, like, say, When They See Us, where almost every episode was, like, over an hour long. I don't understand why they couldn't have done that here, because there was a lot of story that they needed to tell. and none of it really felt satisfying. Nothing even in the 4th episode, I did not feel satisfied with the show. I walked away thinking that was a decent finale. They were able to fix some of the things that weren't working in the first 3 episodes, but I still did not feel that satisfied. I honestly walked away feeling that this was kind of pointless. I didn't really feel like there was much of a reason for this to exist at all. I do believe that Madam C.J. Walker is a very important story to tell. It's a story that many people do need to hear, and I'd love to see a biopic told about her one day. I really love to see more of what she went through, but the problem is nothing about this feels like the respectful sort of biopic that she really does deserve. It feels like it's been flanderized into this soap opera type show that I just was not vibing with at all. This is easily one of the most disappointing things that I have seen all year. Movies, TV, you name it. I was very let down by this show. So overall, I am going to give Self-Made overall a C. Very disappointing overall, guys. I really was pulling for this one. I was really hoping this could be a show that I can recommend to you guys who, are cooped up inside your house right now and, self-quarantined and whatnot. But unfortunately, it's not really a show that is really worth your time at all. I don't really think that there's much you're going to get out of this. But that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.